sir. Can you begin?
Okay.
Shall we begin, sir?
Yes, we can start. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Can you all see me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So, okay. So, dear participants, we're starting off. Warm greeting from the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Srinarana Law College, Putota, Ernakulam. Uh, Good evening, all. I am Tanya Tom, the student coordinator of the IQAC of our college. And today's webinar is on a very interesting topic, gender bias and stereotyping gender equality and women's rights. We have as our resource person a very empowered woman who holds various credentials. She's a role model and great inspiration to many, and the success of every woman should be an inspiration to another. And we are our strongest when we cheer each other, and there is no limit of what we as women can accomplish, as our dearest resource person for the day has rightly proved. And it is my pleasure to welcome our resource person, Mrs. Shobha Koshi, retired Chief Postmaster General and former Chairperson of the Kerala State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. We welcome you, ma'am. It is a big honor for all of us here.
Thank you, Tanya. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, ma'am. So we also have amongst us our beloved principal, sir, Professor Dr. Raghunathan K.R. We welcome you to the gathering, sir. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Yes. Thank you.
We also have in our midst teachers, academicians, faculty members, research scholars, students, and other participants interested in this topic. I welcome you all on behalf of Srinarana Law College, and I'm sure that all of you will benefit from this very informative session. And this session, it will be for an hour, and we'll have a question and answer session after this. To avoid any sort of interruption during the session, kindly note that you mute yourself. A gentle reminder that any disruption of the webinar will cause your removal from the from our discussion, and also kindly use the chat box to post your questions while the session is on, and as said earlier, it will be answered individually at the end of the webinar during the question and answer session. And to save time, I will be putting up your questions to ma'am, who will answer them. Also note that e-certificate will be provided upon feedback submission. The link for the feedback submission would be put in the chat box. You do not have to put anything else in the chat box apart from your questions to ma'am. Please keep that in your mind. I now invite our beloved principal, sir, Dr. Raghunathan K.R., to speak to us and introduce our resource person to the gathering. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to one and all. Actually, we are gathered here today to deal with an imminent topic of the hour, that is gender bias and stereotyping, gender equality and women's rights. Women all over the world have risen about to prove their worth and show as bold leaders and achievers. But still, the problems that they have to encounter on this journey stays hidden. In India, we have constitutional, legal, and customary rights to protect women's rights. But still, atrocities against women and violations of equality principles are rampant. So, what difficulties does a woman face, and how can she overcome these obstacles in her path? Is the main questions we need to contemplate. And in this platform, we will be addressing these matters. In this seventh seminar on legal topics, we are privileged to have Srimati Shobha Koshi, IPS, Indian Postal Service, as our speaker. Srimati Shobha Koshi, Madam, remains a role model for the youth all over the country, as she has achieved great heights with her hard work and dedication. I am immensely honored to welcome Madam to this discussion, and I hope everyone in this seminar gets inspired from her words and her life. And I hope that you will be benefited from this webinar. Thank you. Over to Tanya.
Thank you so much, sir. Ma'am, I welcome you to address the gathering now. Looking forward to your session.
Thank you, Tanya. Dr. Ignathan, faculty members, academicians, and all the other participants who are gathered here today. You've already heard the topic. The topic is gender bias. I hope you can hear me. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. You are audible.
Okay. The topic is gender bias and stereotyping, gender equality, and women's rights. First of all, I must take a caveat that I am not a lawyer. I am like Tanya, who just told me she's a student of English literature, and so am I. So what I am going to talk to you about is based on my experience in government and in my personal capacity. And so I will be sharing with you as far as possible examples from my own life and experiences. I hope it will make some sense to you. This is maybe the third time I'm doing a webinar. I'm still not used to looking at a blank screen and talking. I much enjoy the interacting with people. But as we learned from See You Soon, all of us have to adjust to the new environment. And so I hope I will make some sense to you through this webinar. Thank you. So the topic has been introduced. Tanya, can I have the next slide, please?
No, ma'am.
Is it possible to get it a little bigger, or this is the, okay.
I'll do that, ma'am. 1 minute.
It's a little bigger. That's fine. I'm getting blind these days. So let's go to the first slide. So what I thought, since we are having people of different age groups and levels of understanding in the seminar, starting from first years to seniors, I thought we first take a look at what is gender. So there has to be, let's have a clarity on that. So first, the most authentic kind of definition that is available is WHO's definition, which is available on screen. Putting it very mildly, briefly, what you need to understand is gender is different from sex. Sex is purely defined in terms of genetics. But gender is basically the social and cultural role that society gives to different people. And so it varies according to the social and cultural context of each society. And each member of the society, you learn about your roles through our experience, our response to our environment, whichever environment we are in. It could be family interactions, it could be education, it could be interacting with peers, it could be interacting with learning from what you learn in the media. All these things are contribute to our understanding of our role in gender. Now, the thing is, gender varies according to the context, as I mentioned, and in some cases, it is more rigid than others. But the good news is that it is not cast in stone, it can be changed. That is a good thing, because otherwise, historically, women have always been the gender that has faced discrimination, and that could not have changed, would not change unless there is scope for such change. Next slide, please. Next, once we know what gender is, that is the social and cultural role that society decides, next we have to understand what is gender bias. Gender bias is nothing but, giving, it is a tendency to prefer one gender over another. And generally, the thing is you give preferential treatment to the men, and you are always, there is a prejudice against women in terms of as treated as inferior. So this is not, it is started from the times of Aristotle, and it is existing not only in India or Kerala or anything, but all over the world. There is varying kinds of gender bias. And we imbibe it so much that sometimes we do not even know that, we have taken it. It becomes so much a part of our DNA. And it happens in all walks of life, whether in the house. We are all aware. I don't know about you, but in our childhood, we would be told girls are expected to do these kind of work. Boys are not required to do these things. Just today, I was discussing with my husband, and I was shocked to learn that in his school, which is one of the most prestigious public schools in India, in his time, girls were not allowed to take any science subjects in the senior classes. It was a shock to me, because I don't think even in Kerala I had been exposed to that. But he said boys could not take domestic science, and I don't think there were many who wanted to do that. But no girl, and some of them are very well-known people today, none of them were allowed to take a science subject. They could only take humanities. So, this kind of differential treatment existed in our schools, in our homes, and in education, health. If you look at the health status, we are all aware how health indicators vary for women. It's always the poorest. In economy, we know that women cannot take up work in many places. And I will give you one interesting example from sports. Tennis is a game where men and women play with equal ticket money, because the tournaments take simultaneously. It is only in 1973 that Billie Jean King, she revolted and said, why should I be paid less? So finally, the US Open tennis tournament agreed to give equal prize money for both men and women. But it is only in 2007 that Wimbledon, which is the mecca of tennis, agreed to pay same prize money for men and women. Even today, in most other sports, as well as in these world tennis tournaments, women are paid lesser than men. So there is a difference in all aspects. It's not just in India, but all over the world, at different levels, there is a gender bias. Next slide, please.
Can you see, ma'am?
Next slide. I can see. Now, the next question is, what is gender stereotyping? This is a common thing that we talk about these days. It is basically, I have given the definition which is given by the Office of the High Commission of Human Rights. That is a kind of internationally accepted definition. And what it says is, it is the kind of attributes that first gender, they define the role. Now, under stereotyping, there are not just the roles, but what are the attributes that each of these roles should have. So we are all, it's ingrained into us that this is what a mother ought to be. This is what a father ought to be. This is what a teacher ought to be. This is what a good and obedient daughter ought to be. So on and so forth. So at every stage, you are giving, there is a stereotype that is created by society, and we are all expected to conform to it. And if you don't conform to it, then you feel the negative impact of society's wrath. Now, stereotyping can be both positive and negative. But the thing is, even when it is positive, it can lead to a negative impact. For example, if a mother, we always say, oh, mothers are more nurturing, forgiving, loving, kind. They are good at, handling the family. They are the bulwark of the family. So what happens as a result? All the housework gets piled up on the women. So, even the stereotyping is something we cannot avoid, because it is also a tool with which we process our social world. For example, say you are in a foreign country and suddenly you come across a Malayali. You get very excited. Why? Because you have a stereotype idea about what a Malayali would be like. So you immediately process and you greet that person. Now, there is somebody who comes from a segment of the population you do not like. Then you immediately, your stereotype is that person may turn out to be a wonderful person. But in the beginning, your first reaction is, oh, this person can't be good. So stereotyping is part and parcel of our lives, our attitudes, our values, our norms, and our prejudices. And it is encouraged by society. Society encourages you to develop stereotypes, and all of us internalize it. I'll give you two simple examples from my life. When my daughter was a very little girl, my youngest daughter, the first lesson, you see, why I'm giving this example is, right from class 1, we are taught stereotyping. So there is this essay that all of us would have written, My Family. So the teacher wrote 10 sentences. We were in Gujarat, and she gave my father. In my family, there is my father, my mother, my sister, and my brother or sister, whatever it is. Father goes to office. Mother stays at home and does housework. Now, at that time, it was my first posting, and I was posted in a place called Mehsana, which was 70 kilometers away. So I would get up at crack of dawn and do some cooking and disappear. It was my husband who looked after the children when they woke up, got them dressed, fed them, took them to school. And only late in the evening, I would come back and take their lessons. That's all I did. So my daughter was very puzzled. What she sees is that her father, who has office begins in Gujarat, it starts late, so it's about 10:30. So he takes them to school. The school also begins then. So he takes them to school, and at the rest of the time, he's looking after them in the house. So she changed it. Mother goes to office, father stays at home and does housework. Now the teacher was very upset. She tried her level best, threatened my daughter. She wouldn't budge. So finally, the matter had to be taken to the principal. And then the principal said, who is this child? So they mentioned her name. Then he said, oh, that is fine. In that house, stereotypes are slightly changed. So what I'm trying to say is that even at that stage, it is ingrained into you. It's mother who has to do all the housework and father has to go to office. Similarly, in our house, because I don't drink tea and coffee, my husband makes a very good cup of tea. So it's he who always serves tea to the guests. I will be sitting and talking. So what happens is, particularly after he retired as additional chief secretary from Gujarat, and I was still working, I know in Kerala, many people look at me very unnervingly because there is a husband who goes off to the kitchen to make the coffee or tea, and I am merrily sitting. And I know what is going on in their mind. അത് ജോലി ചെയ്ത് ഇവിടെ ഇങ്ങനെ സ്വസ്ഥമായിട്ടിവിടെ ഇരിക്കുക, പാവം ഭർത്താവിനെ കൊണ്ട് ജോലി ചെയ്യിപ്പിക്കുക. I can see that thought process going on. So what I'm trying to tell you is, in all our lives, these values are sort of internalized and ingrained into us. Can I have the next slide, please?
Sure.
Now, What is the impact that stereotyping has on our lives? See, irrespective of the country's level of development, that means all over the world, what happens is women get affected in one way or the other to when making choices. Now, many of us, we may want to go somewhere abroad to study. Sometimes families are nervous to send you out. They are not happy to send you outside their line of vision. They will say, it has happened to me. I know. Sometimes you want to take a particular subject, then you are told that no, don't take it. In my time, my mother was told by somebody that if your daughter, I got into engineering, and she was told, don't send, because those days they were told girls with engineering degrees will find it difficult to get married. So my mother threw a fit and said that no, you will not take engineering, you will go for home science. Then I threw a fit and said, I will not go for home science. And so the net result is that I ended up taking English literature, which was not really my first choice. And I'm sure this experience would have been shared by many other people. The division of labor within the household often results in time poverty. See, this is a very important thing. A recent study showed by, I think it was Oxfam, they showed that for the 56 minutes that men spent in the house working, women spent 353 minutes. So, what happens is that today women work outside, they have careers outside, but all the family responsibility is also theirs. So, yeah, unless today more and more men are beginning to share the responsibility, but very often you see that reading a newspaper sitting in the front veranda is considered a great job, whereas the women will be multitasking, managing the child, the kitchen, the servant, everything else. So, this sort of thing. And the famous story that I can think of is that of Indira Nui. You remember, I don't know if you've heard that story. She was selected to the board of directors of Pepsi. So she came back late at night, all excited to tell her family. And as she entered the door, her mother was at the gate door saying that, why is it that there is no milk in the fridge today? So she said, I have something to tell you, great news. She said, I am not interested in knowing. Why is there no milk in the fridge? Your husband, we could not give him tea. So she said, but any of you could have gone and got it. She said, no, it's your job. Go first, get it, then come back and tell me what is the news that you want to tell me. So she said, I had to break this good news only after getting back into the car, going to the supermarket, buying the milk and coming back, because it is the woman's responsibility, is what her tradition mother thought it was. So I'm not saying that it is not responsibility. It's not the responsibility of the woman, but what I am saying is it's not the sole responsibility. There has to be a give and take. No job in the house has a label attached to it that this is a man's job or this is a woman's job. But today we tend, under stereotyping, to see it as a woman's job. And as a result, we rarely have time to do many things. So then the third thing is the traditional view that requires women as subordinate to men. And as a result, a girl told me in Kasargod one day, we were discussing child rights. And then she told me, ma'am, in all probability, I will not get married. So I was shocked. She must have been about 23 years old. And she had finished her MSW, and she was very enthusiastic about doing social work. So I said, why do you think you will not get married? It's a conscious choice. And she said, no, ma'am, it's because my community will think that I am overeducated and therefore bold and independent. So I am not likely to get a husband from within my own community. This, she said, at the age of 23. In 1981, one of my batchmates who scored a very high rank, she is from Punjab, she was 22 years old, and she told me when her results came and she got allotted to Rajasthan cadre, she says, okay, now that puts pay to my getting married. So I said, why? You're 22 and why should it put pay? She said, I come from a farming community, and what they want is a housebound wife. At least if I was posted to Punjab, I could have got a husband. But in Rajasthan, there is no chance anybody in my community will want to marry me. And to this day, she remains a spinster. So, what I'm telling you is, men have to be, however qualified you are, even today, the stereotyping requires men to be subordinate, women to be subordinate to men. And this subordination issue, is something that is playing up in COVID times. See, the balance of power is such, woman is subordinate. And when there is a crisis, when there is a disaster, when uncertainties and insecurities mount, it is always taken out on the people who are at the lower level. And that is why today you would have seen in the papers that domestic violence, Garhika Peedanam, is the is the biggest crime rate that is happening during COVID times. It is because of this. That is why violence, coercion, all this happens because ഒരു സ്ത്രീയേക്ക് ഒരു സ്വതന്ത്രമായ വ്യക്തിത്വമുണ്ട് എന്ന് അംഗീകരിക്കാൻ this kind of subordination does not give room for that. So that is one issue. Then investigation of cases and of violence and subsequent legal action. See, you just have to look at the number of, you would be seeing in the newspapers about child rights, children being molested, women being molested. There are so many cases of girls who have been killed in trains and otherwise. All the people get away with it. It's, the mindset is a very important issue, the stereotyping, the attitude. So what happens is very often the what shall I say, the investigation, the decision making, it's all governed by patriarchal notions. So there is no objectivity in the decision making. Then it places barriers on sexual and reproductive rights. I'll just give one such example. The sex ratio in Haryana, how skewed it is. If you are going to produce girls, then you have no right to, you have to have an abortion. You have to get rid of the baby because you don't need another girl child. So that is, these are the kind of barriers we have. I'm just giving one example to save time. Results in discriminatory legislation and failure of much legislative change. Now the thing is, discriminatory legislation, I can give, we are all familiar with recently, what do you call it? That is in 2018. Actually, it's going to be 2 years in 2 days' time. A very interesting decision was taken on adultery by the Supreme Court. What did the Supreme Court, it was a gentleman called Joseph Shine who challenged Section 497 of the IPC, which relates to adultery. And his argument was that if there is an adultery between a gentleman's wife and another person, he can sue the other person, the lover. But if a woman cannot simultaneously sue the love of her husband's life, or she cannot sue her husband, so why should there be this inequality? And the Supreme Court said, yeah, that is right, because if a woman has an affair with another man as an adult and with consent, you can take up the matter in a civil form, or you can divorce the person, but it cannot be a criminal action. Why? Because for the husband to sue the lover is like imagining that the wife is his possession and he is suing because there has been some adverse impact on his possession. So this is a very interesting discriminatory legislation. There are many, but I thought this was a very fascinating one, that women's rights are restored in a kind of an oblique kind of way, that you are an independent person, you have a right to consent and to have free, independent will. Now, why do we say it results in failure of much legislation change? See, if your mindset is like this, now if you take a look at many of the schemes, the acts and the policies of government, the problem lies in implementation. Now, if your mindset is not changing, however many rules and schemes and policies and things you have, it is not going to make a difference. And that is what contributes to failure of the results in legislation not being able to make a change. Can I have the next slide? Now, what is the legal basis of women's rights in India? My God, there is no end of legal basis available. Constitution of India, let's start with that. I mean, I have mentioned some of the important provisions. I don't think I need to explain this to you. All of this emphasize again and again what the government of India or the people's concern. There is a general concern that women and children, they are vulnerable and they need special provisions. 15.3 of the Article 15.3 very specifically says that, and all these other provisions that I have mentioned are also connected with that. Now, international conventions. Now, international conventions are, because these situations exist all over the world. International conventions exist, particularly with that of the United Nations. They serve to nudge every country. Look, this is the gold standard. We have to get there. So they keep pushing every country that bring about changes. You cannot stay in an age when women are totally subordinate. You have to move towards achieving that gold standard. So there are three things which are very, very important. One of them is the Convention for Elimination of Domestic Violence Against Women. Now, that particular convention, Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Now, this is brought about in 1993 along with the Beijing Convention. Now, the thing is, this is called the Bill of Rights for Women, because it speaks about addressing discrimination at every level. And it's a very detailed document. I'm sure many of you have read it. If not, if you read it, you will see that everything we are working towards has been mentioned there. The second one is the UN Security Council Resolution number 1325. Now, that is a very interesting resolution. It speaks about women's role in peace building. Normally things like war and peace are all considered outside the ken of women, of women's activities. But whenever there is a catastrophe, it affects women and children the most. So this particular resolution number 1325, it's a very important resolution. It speaks about how women can be involved in peacekeeping and bringing about peace in troubled areas. Then we have the third one, which is the Sustainable Development Goals of 2015, which is to be completed by 2030. Now, in that, one of the key factors for ensuring sustainable development is considered to be gender equality. Gender equality means get rid of child marriages, sexual and reproductive health to be ensured, reproductive rights to be ensured, unpaid care and domestic work has to be addressed. Women must be given participation and leadership in public life. Economic rights must be ensured. These are all some of the things that are mentioned in the SDG. And India is a signatory to these conventions and these resolutions. And as a result, many of the changes that are coming at today in the legislative field have emanated from the push that we are getting from these international conventions. Now we have the crimes identified against under the IPC. I don't think I need to explain all this, except for the fact that a notable development is the Criminal Law Amendment Bill of 2019, and which has introduced certain new, they've tried to make many provisions gender neutral, and also sexual offenses have been given greater, there is a greater nuances have been explained in terms of introducing what molestation means, what stalking means, what voyeurism means. So keeping pace with the social changes that are happening in the world. Can I have the next one, please? This is, there we talked about IPC constitution and international conventions. Here we are talking about legal basis for, in terms of special laws. So there's a whole lot of things. You can't fill it up. I'd just be wasting a number of pages just writing the laws. But I have selected a few, and of these, as you know, the Maternity Benefit Act was very vastly amended in favor of women in 2019, I think. 2017, and it has given a lot of empowerment to women in terms of when you take when you have a baby, that you can have paid leave. That sort of provision, it has literally doubled. Earlier it was only 12 months, but now it has become 26 months for the first two babies, 12 months for the other. They lay a great deal of stress on the importance of giving creche facilities. All these things have been emphasized. But on the lighter side, I must tell you that, this creche facility was something that in the commission we looked at. And I was surprised to find that the Kerala Commission, it came to us as a complaint that Kerala government has said there will be free creche facilities in all IT parks, and my daughter is not getting this, and so she has had to go to the UK to get these facilities. You need to do something. So when we looked at it, it is true. We found that creche facilities have not been introduced in IT parks as per requirement. It was available to some extent. But what was interesting is, I would request all of you to take a look at the way that Kerala Shop and Establishment Act has been amended. Because in that, it speaks about giving, these are for babies, creches for up to the age of 3. It talks about giving snacks to children. The kind of manpower to be provided for looking after the children is totally and woefully inadequate. And the third thing is, these are also under the Act, Maternity Benefit Act, 4 times a mother can come down to feed a baby. And still, there is no corner provided even in this creche for a breastfeeding mother. So it was so obvious this was drafted by a group of men who have had no clue or no role to play in the upbringing of children. So sometimes you make provisions, and they thought they can cover all the shortcomings by saying it will be free service. So because they said free service, no company was willing to come forward. So we had to pressurize the Labour Department and the government to put pressure on the companies to come together to set up a creche. So you can see special laws may exist, but in its execution, if the provisions, women don't play a role in helping to formulate the provisions, then there could be meaningless provisions added in the Act. Now, I'm not going into the personal laws. There were so many, but as you can see, they've covered every aspect. Now, how effective it is another thing altogether. Now, after looking at this, I thought, instead of commenting on everything, let me talk about 2 acts. One is the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Why I chose it is because the maximum amount of suffering that a woman undergoes is unfortunately within the own home. And here is this act which is supposed to protect us. So let us see to what extent it is doing. So what are its provisions? I thought we could take a look at that. And the second one I thought we will do is the Sexual Harassment at the Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act. Because today, so many women are joining the workforce. So it's very important that we take a look at how comfortable it is for women to work. So I thought, let's just take a look at these two acts and we'll get a flavor of what these other acts are like. Incidentally, I would like to mention one more thing. There is the PCPD PNDT Act, that is the Preconception and Prenatal Diagnostic Regulation Act of 1994. I must mention this also in the Kerala context. When I was in the commission, my colleague and I decided to take a look at how well this is being implemented. Now, as you know, Kerala's sex ratio is pretty okay, but there is a fear that there is a lot of abortions illegally. You know, people are getting to know the gender of their child and having abortions. So we wanted to see how it is being implemented. Now, one of the requirements is that there should be a central committee and there should be district level committees and state level which will monitor. How effective is this monitoring is what we were looking at. Now, for ensuring the effective monitoring, one of the requirements is that there should be a woman representative from an NGO who will take a look at this, who will also be, that was like an external audit. To our surprise, we found that in literate Kerala, it was only after the Supreme Court put pressure that the district committees were formed. And then we looked at Trivandrum District Committee and we were surprised to find there was no representation of women. So we wrote to the government saying that you have to appoint. Till I left, no appointment had happened. I don't know if it has still happened. But the hilarious thing is, when I went to Calicut, I started checking in every district, do you have this? So when I talked to the committee there, to the people there, and I said, how is it that you have not appointed a woman representative? They didn't have anybody. They thought for a while, and then they said, madam, our DMO is a woman. That should qualify. So what I'm trying to say is this is the mindset. So this is the mindset that prevents much legislation to be effective. So can we go to the next slide, please? I thought we should take a look at the status of women's rights. See, so many laws, we have just seen how many laws exist, how many amendments are being made. So what is the situation? See, this is in January 2020, the NCRB brought out their tentative figures for the year 2018. So it shows that total number of crimes against women, just take 378,277. Look at the total number of rape cases. See that it is a rape in every 15 minutes. Then, this is very interesting for law students. Number of cases in which charge sheets were issued, 85.3. But convicted cases of rape is only 27.2%. Now it shows how effective the legal support that the offender gets. It also shows how poor our investigation is. Both of these are responsible for conviction in rape cases to not happen. Look at the cruelty. This is the number one offense and the crimes against women. Cruelty by husbands and relatives. Now you have to couple that 31.9% along with the suicide by housewives, people who are desperate, who have no other option, who have committed suicide. Look, the number 2 offense is assault on women with intent to outrage modesty. And as a comic relief, look at the sexual harassment at the workplace. 965 is the figure in this whole country. 965 complaints alone were registered, and that 570 represents the situation the previous year. I thought you should see the comparative thing and how paltry the figure is of people who have registered complaints for being harassed at the workplace. This may give the impression no harassment is happening. Not at all. A study shows that 70% of people don't complain. And many people, and so it gives a very rosy picture that maybe there is not much sexual harassment happening. But this figure is a reflection of how women do not find a voice even to express a complaint. Now, one interesting thing is the rate of crime in India has gone down. But the rate of crime against women per 1 lakh population in the last, from 2017 to 2018, for the same period has increased. This is also food for thought. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Now we come to the salient features of the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Now, this was the first time that domestic violence was defined in physical, emotional, sexual, and economic terms. As you are law students, I'm not going into any great explanation. I'm just touching on the points to go in the next slide to what are the limitations. Then it defines who a domestic aggrieved person is. That means there is a definition for domestic violence. All that is required is that you need to have a domestic relationship. You should have lived as husband and wife. You don't necessarily have to be married, and you could be living as a partner. And it has to be in a shared household, and house does not mean that you need to own the property. It could be something that you have taken in on rent or whatever. Then, what are the things that you can gain from this act? One is the right to an order of protection, that in case of tremendous violence and beating and bashing that you can get an order of protection against it. You can get an injunction also, which restricts that person from attacking you. Now, the second thing is right to live in the same house. You can't be thrown out of your house. You have a right to residence. Third is you can claim maintenance for yourself and your children if you have. You have a right to custody, and it is in this case the best interest of the child prevails. So very often it is with the mother that the child is retained, but the father has visiting rights, because that is also a child's right to enjoy the mentorship and the companionship of the father. Right to claim compensation in case, in terms of violence, there has been medical bills, there are mental torture, there is all these kinds of problems. Then in that case, you can claim that too. Now, there is no gender bias in terms of against whom you can get the order, because you can get order against a husband, and not only the male, but even the female relatives. Anyone who has contributed to domestic violence against the woman, you can get an order against them. Then it also provides the support of a protection officer who are appointed by government, or a service provider who is inevitably an NGO, who can help you and guide you through the process. Okay, next. Now, the interesting thing about this PWD-ADV Act is it is considered, it mentions women. But since woman is the bulwark of the family, it's actually a law which seeks to protect and preserve the sanctity of the family also. That is something that many people fail to realize. They think it is some law only for women. So let us take a look at what are the challenges. See, some time limits are given. Within 3 days, the case must be taken up. Within 6 months, the case must be disposed. None of that happens. What happens is that the case, we are lucky if the case gets settled in 1 year. So time frames are not maintained. And why is that? Now, there's something very interesting. You have to go to the judicial magistrate first class for these cases. Now, when you get there, the women's cases are taken up after all the criminal cases have been heard for the day. So the woman has to stand there along with all the criminals, wait for all of them to be disposed of, and then the cases to be heard. And there is such a large volume of work. Since there is no separate facility, then naturally the time process goes on. Now, the second one is interesting. Difficulty in enforcing the orders of the court. Penalty only for breach of protection order. Now, this is what the law says. I talked to some women protection officers during my tenure in the commission, and also very recently. Now, the insight they gave me into this is very interesting. Now, first of all, the the first order is the protection order. Now, what are you seeking protection against? Against domestic violence. So, in all other matters, whether it is maintenance, custody, or compensation, or whatever, you have to hear the husband's side before a judge can give an order. But in the matter of violence, if you have been beaten up and you have proof to show that you have been consistently beaten up through the years, why should the judge have to say, let me hear the other side before I give an injunction order? It doesn't make common sense. But the truth is, many of these women told me, protection officers, ma'am, no judge will give you this protection order immediately. They will defer the case and say, okay, let's first hear the other side, even in the matter of protection, and then only we will give the order. Now, thereafter, when the orders are given for enforcing, you know what happens? An order is given to the police station also. Now, what happens is the protection officer, particularly in the matter of giving residence, that means the right to stay in the same house, the minute they get this order, it's very interesting. The husband and the family completely remove the water connection. You know, if there is a well, they remove the pulley from the well, the pumping, you know, the electrical connection for pumping, electricity is cut. All the things are removed. In some cases, the door bolts are removed so that the door cannot be shut. And bolts are put from outside so that a woman will not be safe inside. So, and then they disappear from there. So what happens is the protection officer has to sort of do up and down a number of times. Sometimes they have to take the police also with them. And thereafter only, with videographing the whole house, they will be able to allow the woman in. Now, because of these conditions, adverse conditions, and also the neighbors, in many cases, the neighbors will be relatives. So they also will not support the lady. So as a result, large number of them, despite all this effort, they will just give up the fight and go away. Very few. I know only one case of a girl who's still suffering, who has still not been able to get relief, but who is staying against the greatest of adversities. Most women give up the fight because they cannot put up with this. And the interesting thing is that in this order, there is no provision for penalty for breach of residence or any of these orders. The penalty is specifically prescribed only for the protection of order, which is very difficult to get. Now, the third thing is, as I mentioned, just told you, most people give up the fight. Why? Because they have no support system. Very few people, other than the family, and the family may be somewhere far away. So unless you have a family who is willing to support you and is very close, there's no way a woman can hold out against such consistent and sustained aggression against her. Then, another very interesting thing I learned from these ladies is most orders do not mention the category of abuse. See, we have got the abuse defined in physical and sexual and emotional and economic terms. But it is some kind of a patriarchal mindset that the judges do not want to get into what is the category of abuse. The general thing is, do try and adjust. Kore adiyakka kondalu adu athra veliya karyamano? And the people ask. You know, when I was in Child Rights Commission, in the POCSO cases, I have had police officers who say, "Ee POCSO Act vanne pinne kudumbangalellam tagarkkuka." ഇതിനു മുമ്പും ഈ പോക്സോ ആക്ടിന് മുമ്പ് ഇതൊക്കെ നടക്കുന്നില്ലായിരുന്നു, കുടുംബങ്ങൾ മുന്നോട്ട് പോയില്ലായിരുന്നു. അപ്പൊ പിന്നെ ഇതെന്തോ ഇത്ര വലിയൊരു കാര്യമാക്കേണ്ടത്? The same mindset applies here also. So they do not even wish to, I believe, write the category of abuse. Then the next one is women are generally reluctant to complain. Why? Because they have an ingrained mindset of subordination. They do not want to upset the apple cart, and they know the social stigma that will follow if they don't. And the last one is lack of legal support. Very often, these women do not, particularly from the economically weaker section, they do not have money. Now, this is something which I would like to talk to all of you lawyers. See, they get free legal aid. Very often in free legal aid, not all, but many of people take it in a very routine matter. But the offender will come with very, very high priced lawyers who will come and effectively argue the case. So there is a lack of effective legal support for these women. This is a very serious problem for them. And even this government's one-stop crisis centers, I have gone to many of them. I found it is neither one-stop nor is the crisis addressed there, because the women have to go to different places, and sometimes ചെരവ കൊണ്ടൊക്കെ തലയ്ക്ക് അടിച്ച് ചോരയുമായിട്ടാണ് people come. And if it is a PWDV Act, the police will say, oh, PWDV Act, പോയി നിങ്ങളുടെ പ്രൊട്ടക്ഷൻ ഓഫീസറിനെ വിളിച്ചോണ്ട് വാ, let her file the case. Then the protection officer has in the middle of the night to say, സാറേ, ഇത് തലയിലടിക്കുന്ന ഒരു അസോൾട്ട് കേസ് അല്ലേ, അത് IPCയുടെ അടിയിൽ അത് രജിസ്റ്റർ ചെയ്യുക, PWDയുടെ അടിയിലുള്ള കേസ് ഞങ്ങൾ പുറകെ കൊണ്ടുവരാം. But this is how the police view it. And there are thousands of women out there holding government orders for protection and still getting beaten up because the husband says, കോർട്ടിന്നൊക്കെ ആളെ വിളിച്ചോണ്ട് വാ, ഇപ്പം എൻ്റെ അടി മേടിച്ചോ. So what I am saying is, this is an act which has got great good intent, but in implementation, there are serious limitations. Can we go to the next one? The next one is the protection of, women from Prevention of Sexual Offences Act, Sexual Harassment Act at the workplace. Now, this is a very interesting act again. What is interesting is, it took 50 years after independence. Women started working earlier. Equal Remuneration Act came in earlier. But it took 50 years for the Supreme Court to recognize in the Vishaka case that sexual harassment is a serious issue and you need guidelines. It took 16 years even thereafter for the POSH Act to come in, this Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act at the workplace to come in 2013. Now, this is a fairly comprehensive act which covers organized and unorganized sectors. But the interesting thing is, this is considered more within the ambit of a labor law. It is not a redressal of sexual it is not looking at the gender issues and sorting it out in that way. It is looking at gender in the framework of labor law. So that is why there are many features of labor laws which are contained in this POSH Act. For example, the main objective is, a woman is working, her gender is posing a problem. The gender of other people are also, and their behavior is posing a problem. So let us, like a labor dispute, find a way to settle it. That is how it is worked. So what is it? It defines sexual harassment. So for the first time, there is a definition of sexual harassment in two categories. I'm not going into general provisions. One is quid pro quo. That means you are either threatened, you either, you make a sexual advance, and if you offer them some incentive, we'll give you some promotion or some betterment, or you threaten them. So either way, it is a quid pro quo. The other is a hostile work environment. Now, what happens is all kinds of lewd and colored jokes, some physical advances, some kind of touching, pretending to be accident, then showing people pornography. All of this makes things very uncomfortable. And as far as there is another aspect to it, see, men have never been sexually harassed. So they make comments which they think is only a joke, but it can be very difficult for the women to accept. So that kind of a hostile working environment. Then definition of employee, you can be any kind of an employee, regular, temporary, ad hoc, you can be an apprentice. All categories of people as far as possible. It's a fairly large definition. Then you have extended workplace. That means it's not necessarily in the office where you are working, but in a related office also it can happen. Or it can happen in the transportation that is provided by the employer. If you are sexually harassed, even that can be come within the ambit of the Act. Then it is very important to set up an internal complaints committee. That is a mandatory requirement. And if wherever there is more than 10 people working, and if in other places their cases are looked at the district level complaints committees to be set up by the the district collector. So you have a 4-member internal committees headed by a woman, or a district level committee comprising of 5 people that also is headed by a eminent person who is involved in the area of women's rights. Can we go to the next one, please? See, this because it is a labor law, as you know, in all labor disputes, first you have to have a conciliation. So that conciliation meeting has to take place, and it says it has to happen at the request of the woman. But the real fact is, there is so much pressure on the woman when once a complaint comes that you settle. So she will be sometimes coerced into going into the process of conciliation. It's not done very willingly. But there is no scope for monetary settlement during the conciliation period. The inquiry, there is a time frame that I have mentioned. Then the action, in case it is proved, it has to be done. Even the whole inquiry process and the discipline and the action thereafter has to come if you are a government employee, or where there is service rules as per that rules, and otherwise as per the rules prescribed for this particular purpose. Then, in case a person has undergone a suffering, mental harassment, or physical some kind of problem, and there is a scope for giving compensation, then there is, as I mentioned, there is an attempt to try and prevent the occurrence, not just through the internal complaints committee, but there are so many others, particularly creating awareness. That is a very important issue. Then, the disclosure of the identity of the victim and respondent, it is supposed to be kept secret, but the tragedy is that it is never is. Now, this is a very thing. The section 14, it also says that in case the complaint is found to be false or malicious, then action should be taken against the person who made the complaint. Can we go to the next one? I'll run through the other. So now I will discuss the shortcomings here. See, first of all, by just looking at the number 965, you know that after all these years, in 7 years or 5 years, because it's 2018 figure, not much has been achieved. Then the second thing is, once you make a complaint, nobody will want that person to work under them. So there's a social stigma attached. Then secondly, there are no supporting systems to help this person who makes the complaint. She has to rely on the administration, and very often the administration would be hand in gloves with the person against whom the person is complaining. So the battle has to be fought single-handedly, and so it is not often a victim-friendly act. Then, why I said that also again is, the person who harasses you very often is somebody senior or powerful. So this act does not take into consideration the fact that this poor lady is making a complaint against this very powerful person. And there is a serious fear of victimization and other threats, not just from that person, but from the system itself. That is not happening. Then the third thing is, when there is sexual overtones, the conciliation process, which is all right when you have labor disputes and all that, this conciliation process, does it not undermine the dignity of a woman? This is an issue that is seriously raised by women's rights people. Then, the penal provisions against employers for non-compliance is very, very small. For example, FICCI did a study, and they found that 36% of Indian companies and 25% of multinationals still do not have internal complaints committees. That is because it's only 50,000. Who is bothered? So that is a serious problem. And then if the confidentiality of the identity of the person is exposed, it's only 5,000 rupees. So how does it make a difference? So this is a serious drawback. Then the other thing is, when you have put a condition right at the beginning saying that if it is a false and malicious complaint, which means that whoever wrote the act also thinks, oh, women are going to complain. See the mindset, how it appears. So it casts a presumptive notion in the minds of people, oh, many of these complaints are going to be false. And that adds to the burden of power politics in the workplace, and also again results in the women deciding to keep quiet, either leave the job, suffer, take a transfer, but get out of the situation. Next one, please. Then there are some ambiguities. One is, what is this term? Actually, the word is unwelcome. See, all the something that is unwelcome advances or unwelcome actions. Who decides that? A woman may feel that it is unwelcome to me, but people judging it, unless they have the right mindset, and as Delhi High Court said in the Preeti Sodhi case, unless you are willing to look at it from the point of view, perspective of the complainant, you may not see it as a complaint. I phoned my own postal department and asked, how many cases have we uh, really taken action against in terms of the number of complaints received? And I found that over the years, only 2 cases have been, since 2013, action has been taken. In all other cases, nothing could be proved. So this is one serious problem. There are some issues regarding who will take action against contract employees who harass. Should it be the contractor, or should it be the person who is in whose office they are working? So this is one issue. Then the other thing is the qualification and selection of members of the committee. Many people to whom I talked, what they said is that the internal compliance committee very often does not understand that they have to strictly follow a legal procedures, just like you do in disciplinary cases, and you have to document everything systematically. Otherwise, in the end, all these things will be mopped out. Then I already mentioned the employer's liability is very limited. See, the most important thing, internal compliance complaint is very important, but creating awareness both to the stakeholders, the women, as to what are their rights and what are their responsibilities, and what do the provisions of the act mean. That is not being done. And also to all the other people, the male members, they also have to be empowered by giving them understanding of what this act is. Very often it is the Women's Day that is scheduled for these kind of activities in government offices. And it is my experience that whenever I go to speak on Women's Day, only women will be there. All the men will go for tea and coffee at that time. So towards the end, I have to say that if you want me to come, ensure that men are sitting there. Because men think that Women's Day means it's a holiday for them. So empowerment just does not happen. Awareness doesn't get created. And there is no action against the employer for this. And then I already mentioned about the penalty for breach of confidentiality, the lack of all these things I have mentioned. And I also mentioned the non-availability of supporting mechanism. See, there should be some counseling set up, some legal aid, some support should be there from the thing. Here, all that the employer is supposed to do is help them to make the complaint and ensure that the person against whom the complaint is made available and the internal complaints committee meets and they take action. That is not enough. In this setup, more things are required to be done if this act has to be effective. Can we go to the last slide, please? I'll run through it. Now, what is a way forward? See, if you've heard this whole thing, your topic that you gave me was very relevant because gender lies and the stereotyping, the bias, all of this lies at the center of all these issues. The day we start recognizing a woman as a separate entity, that is the day you know, as a separate individual, equal, a person enjoying equal rights, then in that case, all these things will fall into place. But today, we are not ensuring equality. We are not protecting the dignity. We may worship women, all the Devis we worship, but as far as the human flesh and bone women are concerned, we do not give them dignity, and very often we do not respect their rights. Patriarchal mindsets, I've already explained it. At every level, patriarchal mindsets have been a problem. Then we have to keep pace. You see, the laws are created, is a reflection of the socio-cultural ethos. Like I mentioned, the sexual harassment thing. It took 63 years for the country to bring out a sexual harassment law, a law against sexual harassment. No, we have to keep pace with social and cultural development. For example, even when we talk about harassment today, there can be cyber harassment. The act needs to be amended to include that also. Then implementation of laws needs greater commitment. What do I mean by greater commitment? Very simple. You know, for women and children, always they will say separate court has been set up, but it will be the same court, just given another designation. If they say women protection, I know in the case of children, special juvenile police units will be set up. It will be the same SHO wearing 3 different hats. So if we are going to set up, special courts must be set up. Motor vehicle cases were being tried in the same act, in the same court in Idiki, for example, as child rights. And it will always, women and child rights cases will be taken up last. So we need to invest more in our women and children. That is very easy. Only then we can adhere to time frames. Then creating greater awareness among stakeholders. So many of us do not know the provisions of the laws that have been made for us. It's important to talk about it, to disseminate information. And finally, we need social commitment from the legal system to the rights of the vulnerable. This is the last point. This I appeal to you. All of you are going out, you're going to be lawyers. You will all build up, you will struggle in the beginning, but you will build up practice. Then these poor women or poor children who come to you from lower socioeconomic strata, they will just be a footnote. And some of you will become government pleaders. Then it becomes a nuisance. It becomes a nuisance because you have to deal with this case for a very paltry sum of money. I earnestly ask all of you, there's such a big difference you can make to the implementation of these laws. You talk about pro bono cases. Do something like that. Keep a percentage of your time, a very fractional percentage of your time for these kind of cases. But make each intervention by you count, make a difference. That will really help the cause of women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Oh, I have exceeded time, I noticed, by 10 minutes.
No, ma'am, that's totally fine. It was such an informative session, ma'am. We're really blessed to have you amongst us.
Thank you.
Ma'am, why don't we move on to the question and answer section?
Yeah, please go ahead. What are the questions?
So we do have a few questions by our participants.
Okay.
So
I will try to answer them to the best of my knowledge and ability. Okay.
sure, ma'am. So the first question was by Prabha Sharath. Her question was, in the current scenario, is gender equality possible?
In the current scenario, it is not possible. But we have to create the scenario which makes it possible. And that is where each of us has to play a role. There's no point thinking that somebody else is going to make that difference. We have to make that difference and we have to make it count. So what is gender equality? Gender equality is just simply recognizing a woman as an equal, that she is an individual, that she has her own right to opinions and to actions. And also for the women to realize that you don't need to be a man to enjoy your rights. You can be a woman, you can be happy being a woman, and yet you can do the things. What is it that you want? You want a freedom of choice. You do not have a freedom of choice. And how do you get a freedom of choice? You get a freedom of choice only if you are educated, you have the facility I'm not saying getting PhD is education, but you have the ways and wherewithal to stand on your own 2 feet if the need arises. If you have that choice, you can make many difference. For example, I will tell you, when I was working in the health ministry, chemicals and petrochemicals ministry, I got a chance to go and work in the World Bank for 6 months. My husband told me, you want to go, you go. But I willingly made that choice. I don't want to go because my daughter was in the 9th standard. I had to make that choice, which is more important, going to the World Bank and maybe making some money or being there available for my daughter at the crucial time. My husband gave me the space to make that choice. I made it. I have no regret. That I think is equality. That you have been given to make choices. If you have to make choices in a happy frame of mind, you will make it to the benefit of the people you love. But if you are going to be coerced, you're going to be very unhappy. You will never feel equal. You will always feel that somebody pushed you into doing things, isn't it? So equality is possible, but step by step, if each one of us sitting here decides to work towards it, that itself will create greater space for equality. And that is how we need to create more and more ground for equality. That's how I see it.
That was a beautiful answer, ma'am. Ma'am, so the next question is from Harita Satyam. She has asked, how can we teach students gender inequality from school onwards? The only way we had seen are through books, more than practicable. So if Harita Satyan is here, you yourself could ask ma'am the question. Malayalatile question ചോദിക്കണമെങ്കിലും ചോദിക്കാൻ കേട്ടോ, ഒരു കുഴപ്പമില്ല.
No problem. And because I was rushing through, I spoke more in English because I'm faster in English than Malayalam. So Malayalam ചോദ്യം ചോദിച്ചോളൂ, ഉത്തരം പറയാം. Her question is, how do you teach equality?
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, from school to students.
From school. See, school is a terrain that I dealt with in the കഴിഞ്ഞ 3 വർഷങ്ങളായിട്ട് ബാലാവകാശ കമ്മീഷനിൽ ഇരുന്നപ്പോൾ പല അനുഭവങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടായിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഒന്നാമത്, ഈ ഒരു 5ാം ക്ലാസ് 6ാം ക്ലാസ് ആയി കഴിയുമ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് ടീച്ചർമാര് കുട്ടികൾ, ഇപ്പൊ പല കുട്ടികളും പറയും, ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് നല്ല സൗഹൃദങ്ങൾ വിത്ത് ദി അതർ സെക്സ് ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷേ ടീച്ചർമാര് ഒരു സ്റ്റേജ് കഴിയുമ്പോൾ സംസാരിക്കല്, മാറിയിരിക്കണം, ഒരു സംസാരം പോലും പെർമിറ്റ് ചെയ്യില്ല എന്ന് പറയും. അത് പക്ഷെ അങ്ങനെ ഒരു ലിമിറ്റേഷൻ ആൺകുട്ടികൾക്ക് കൊടുക്കാറില്ല. അതിന് കാരണമുണ്ട്. കാരണം വി ആർ ബിൽഡിങ് ഫയർ വാൾസ്. നമ്മുടെ സമൂഹം അത്തരത്തിലായതുകൊണ്ട് കുട്ടികളുടെ സംരക്ഷണവും കൂടെ നോക്കേണ്ടത് കൊണ്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇത് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. പക്ഷേ ഇൻ ആൻ അതർ വേ നമ്മൾ ഇത് പെർപെട്രേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുകയാണ്. ബിക്കോസ് ഇവരോട് സംസാരിക്കല്, ഇവരോട് മിണ്ടരുത്, ഇവർ പറയുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് തന്നെ മനസ്സിൽ തോന്നുന്നുണ്ട്, എന്തുകൊണ്ടാണ് നമ്മളെ മാത്രം ഇങ്ങനെ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. നമുക്കറിയാം, നമ്മൾ വീടുകളിൽ പോകും, വീട്ടിൽ നിന്ന് പോകുമ്പോൾ എങ്ങോട്ട് പോകുന്നു, എവിടെ പോകുന്നു, ഇതൊക്കെ നമ്മുടെ പേരൻസിന് നമ്മളോടുള്ള കൺസേൺ കൊണ്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇത് ചോദിക്കുന്നത്. പക്ഷേ ഇതെല്ലാം ഒരു ഇൻഇക്വാലിറ്റിയുടെ ഫീലിംഗ് നമ്മുടെ മനസ്സിൽ അത് ഒരു വിധത്തിൽ ഉണ്ടാക്കുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നു. ഇതാണ് ഒരു തരം. രണ്ടാമത്, ഈ സ്കൂളിലെയൊക്കെ ടെക്സ്റ്റ് ബുക്സ്, പോലീസുകാരൻ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ് പടം കാണിച്ചാൽ എപ്പോഴും പുരുഷനായിരിക്കും, ടീച്ചർ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ പലപ്പോഴും സ്ത്രീയെയാണ് കാണിക്കുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ അങ്ങനെ പല പല തരം സ്റ്റീരിയോ ടൈപ്സ് ഉണ്ടാക്കുന്നു. ഞാനൊരു വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ലെക്ചർ ഈ അച്യുതമേനോൻ സെന്റർ, നമ്മുടെ ട്രിവാൻഡ്രത്തെ ശ്രീചിത്ര ഇൻസ്റ്റിറ്റ്യൂട്ടുമായിട്ട് അടുത്തുള്ള അച്യുതമേനോൻ സെന്ററിൽ അറ്റൻഡ് ചെയ്തു. അപ്പോഴാണ് ഞാൻ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത്, മെഡിക്കൽ ബുക്കുകളിൽ പോലും ഭയങ്കര ജെൻഡർ ഡിസ്ക്രിമിനേഷൻ ഉണ്ട്. ഒരേ സിംറ്റംസ് കൊണ്ട് ഒരു സ്ത്രീയും പുരുഷനും വരുവാണെങ്കിൽ, തലവേദന, ദേഹം വേദന, അങ്ങനെ ചില പ്രത്യേക സിംറ്റംസുമായിട്ട് വന്നാൽ പുരുഷന്മാർക്കാണെങ്കിൽ എന്ത് ചെയ്യണം എന്നുള്ളത് ഒന്ന്. സ്ത്രീകളാണെങ്കിൽ ഇതിങ്ങനെ നിരന്തരമായ പ്രശ്നങ്ങളും കൊണ്ട് വന്നാൽ ഈ ചെറിയ ഹിസ്റ്റീരിയ ആണോ എന്ന് ചെക്ക് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. ഇത് ബോംബെയില് ഇതിന്റെ ഒരു സ്റ്റഡി നടന്നിട്ട് എൻറ്റയർ മെഡിക്കൽ സിലബസ് ഇപ്പൊ അവര് ജെൻഡർ ന്യൂട്രൽ ആക്കി റിവൈസ് ചെയ്യാൻ നോക്കുക, ഇങ്ങനത്തെ പഴയ സ്റ്റീരിയോ ടൈപ്സ് മാറ്റാൻ. പക്ഷെ കേരളത്തിലൊന്നും ഇപ്പോഴും അത് അംഗീകരിച്ചിട്ടില്ല. ആ ഒരു ടോക്കാണ് ഞങ്ങൾ കേൾക്കാൻ പോയത്. അപ്പൊ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞു വന്നത്, നമ്മളെ എല്ലാ തലത്തിലും കുട്ടികൾക്ക് നമ്മൾ വളരെ കോൺഷ്യസ് ആയിട്ടും നിരന്തരമായിട്ടും ഈ ജെൻഡർ സ്റ്റീരിയോ ടൈപ്പിങ്ങിനെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യണം. വിദ്യാഭ്യാസം എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ ക്ലാസ്സിലെ പെരുമാറ്റം അല്ലെ സ്കൂളിലെ പെരുമാറ്റം മാത്രമല്ല, വീടുകളിലും ടെക്സ്റ്റ് ബുക്കുകളിലും നമ്മൾ കാണുന്ന സിനിമകളിലും എല്ലാത്തിലും ഇതിന്റെ ഒരു മാറ്റങ്ങൾ വന്നാൽ മാത്രമേ നല്ല രീതിയിൽ ഈ ഇക്വാളിറ്റിയുടെ ഇത് മാറ്റം. ഇതാണ് സസ്റ്റൈനബിൾ ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് ഗോൾസ് പറയുന്നതും ഇതാണ് ഗവൺമെന്റ് പല നിയമങ്ങളിൽ കൂടെ അഡ്രസ് ചെയ്യാൻ നോക്കുന്നത്. പക്ഷെ നിയമം കൊണ്ട് മനോഭാവം മാറില്ല. മാറണമെങ്കിൽ ഇത് ഓരോ ലെവലിലും, അതില് മാതാപിതാക്കൾക്കും പേരൻസിനും ടീച്ചേഴ്സിനും ഒക്കെ വളരെയധികം ഒരു റോൾ ഉണ്ട് ഇത് പ്ലേ ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട്.
Okay, ma'am.
Difficult but possible. Nothing is impossible. അത് നമ്മൾ മനസ്സിലാക്കണം.
Next question is, we can say that there are laws for women, but we can see the implementation of it in a proper way that is lacking. So do you feel there should be a proper machinery for it?
See, I gave you the example of the PCPNDT Act. There is a machinery for ensuring implementation. പക്ഷെ അതിലും ഒരു വനിതയെ വെക്കണം. ഒറ്റ കാര്യമേ ഉള്ളൂ, പുറത്തു നിന്നുള്ള NGO ആയിട്ടുള്ള ഒരു വനിതയെ വെക്കണം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞത് ഇന്ന് വരെയും അത് നടപ്പാക്കിയിട്ടില്ല. സോ മെഷീനറി ഈസ് ഇൻബിൽറ്റ് ഇൻ ദി ആക്ട്സ്. പക്ഷെ ഈ ലോകത്തിലുള്ള എല്ലാ ആക്ടുകളും എങ്ങനെയാണ് ഒരു മെഷീനറി മോണിറ്റർ ചെയ്യുന്നത്? അതിനാണ് സെപ്പറേറ്റ് മെഷീനറീസും മെക്കാനിസംസും തന്നിട്ടുള്ളത്. ഇപ്പൊ ഞങ്ങളുടെ കൂട്ട് ബാലാവകാശ കമ്മീഷനിൽ ഇരിക്കുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് 3 ആക്ട് മോണിറ്റർ ചെയ്യുന്ന സൗകര്യം തന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. RT ആക്ട്, ജുവനൈൽ ജസ്റ്റിസ് ആക്ട്, പോക്സോ ആക്ട്. പക്ഷെ അതിന്റെ മോണിറ്ററിങ്, ഇംപ്ലിമെന്റേഷൻ മോണിറ്റർ ചെയ്യാനായിട്ട് ഡേറ്റ കിട്ടാൻ പോലും പ്രയാസമാണ്. അതൊക്കെ നമ്മൾ പരിശ്രമിച്ച് ഇസ് ഇറ്റ് ഇമ്പോർട്ടൻറ്റ്, ഞങ്ങൾ ചെയ്യുന്നത് പോരെ എന്നുള്ള ഒരു മനസ്ഥിതിയിൽ നിന്ന് ഈ ഡേറ്റയൊക്കെ കൊടുത്ത് ഇത് നമ്മൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി, ഇത് മറ്റൊരാൾക്ക് വേണ്ടി ചെയ്യുകയല്ല. ഈ നിയമങ്ങൾ കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് സമൂഹത്തിനെ മുഴുവനും ബാധിക്കുന്നതാണ്, സമൂഹത്തിന് മുഴുവനും നല്ലത് വരാനായിട്ടാണ് ചെയ്യുന്നത് എന്നുള്ള ഒരു മനസ്ഥിതി നമുക്ക് വന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ തീർച്ചയായിട്ടും ഇതിന്റെ ഇംപ്ലിമെന്റേഷൻ ഇംപ്രൂവ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. പക്ഷെ പലപ്പോഴും നമ്മൾ കാണുന്നത് ഈ ഓരോ നിയമം വരുമ്പോ ഇനി അടുത്തത് വന്നു, ഇനി ഇതും ചെയ്യണം എന്നുള്ള ഒരു അഡീഷണൽ ബേർഡൻ ആയിട്ടാണ് നമ്മൾ ഇത് കാണുന്നത്. അതുകൊണ്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് നോട്ട് എ ക്വസ്റ്റ്യൻ ഓഫ് ഹാവിംഗ് എ ന്യൂ മെക്കാനിസം. It is a question of ensuring that the existing mechanisms function and with a different mindset. That is important.
Thank you, ma'am. Another question is from Advocate Geeta. The question is, a lot of affluent women are facing gender inequality and violence in their homes. They keep quiet due to social stigma as well as societal pressure. So what do you think they should do to get out of this?
I think it depends on the individual. You see, a lot of sensitive, you see, in many places there are support groups. As I mentioned, even in the case of sexual harassment at the workplace, one of the major drawbacks is there is no support group available for the woman to go. Very often, again, it is a question of the social stigma. So people don't want to go and confide in people. But ultimately, there are people who are now beginning to speak out, and either you change your mindset and and if there are support groups, you seek it. And for affluent people, it's a little easier because at least they have money. Think of the poor. They cannot even hire a good lawyer or a good system to support you. So I think basically it is not a question of rich or poor. Everybody fails the stigma. We need to have support groups. We need to be able to support each other. Tanya, right at the beginning, you said we need to cheer for each other. That is what is most important. We need to be able to lend a helping hand. And for that, we need NGOs and others to really come to the fore and be supportive. Then
Yes.
we'll be able to tackle this.
Yes. Ma'am, another question is, it's by Nisha Ismail. There are various laws and legislations relating to women, yet the crime and atrocities against women are increasing. So do you think this is due to the lack of women being aware of their rights?
Yes. One, it is women are not aware of their rights. That's not the only thing. Secondly, as I pointed out, some of these provisions themselves are not very, at every level, the woman, it is not very women friendly. Like I told you about the sexual harassment. These provisions, like in the case of the Maternity Benefit Act, these are provisions which have been often made by men who have no idea of the workings of a woman's mind. I'll give you one simple example. Many years ago, when I was in the health department, we were discussing the National Tuberculosis Program. The DG of the health services, who's the top technical man in the medical sector in the government, and his senior officers were there. I was there with my joint secretary, and she was also a lady, and we were talking about indicators, and all kinds of indicators were mentioned for deciding the success of the program. And suddenly, my joint secretary, who is a very strong women's right activist, said, "What about women's rights, women's health indicator?" And to our horror, the technical officer heading the program came and said, "What has women's rights health got to do with this TB program? वो तो family welfare में देखा जाएगा." So even the top technical man saw woman as only a reproductive machine. He could not. Then, of course, we all shouted and the DG supported him. So why are we putting women's issue here? Women's issue to family planning mein karne do. So women don't get TB, they do. Their life is not centered around gynecological problems. So what I am trying to say is implementation requires an understanding of the beneficiary also. Very often that is missing. Secondly, as we said, the mindset. The implementation is done not, see what constitutes an unwelcome thing. It is a very subjective decision. So you need to have the right people at the right places to make the right provisions and the right implementation process. Without that, the law will stay at one level and the parallel course they are on. Despite all these laws coming into being, from 2005 to 2018, do you know the number of women joining the workforce fell by 10.7%? Now that is also an indication that our laws really, its implementation needs to come up to a better standard.
Exactly, ma'am. Ma'am, what advice would you give to women who are facing gender inequality in their marriage and home, especially when they have only girl children and men are looked down upon?
That itself is a provision under the Domestic Violence Act, it comes under the emotional abuse issue. But all of us cannot go to court and all of us cannot be breaking up families. So I think women have to, first of all, realize, take it upon themselves that I have to empower my daughters. That is one thing. Empowering your daughters for the next level, that is very important. The second thing that you need to do is you yourself. I mean, there are many ways to skin a cat. Unless you have a particularly abusive relationship, there are many ways in which even families can be, brought back together. We see so many examples in and around us, in our families also. I know cases of extremely adverse situations where women took it upon them to strategically play a role and bring about unity in the family. Everything cannot be settled by law. There are certain things that we have to handle ourselves. But if things are at a very adverse level, then there is nothing you can do. But it is important for every mother, every woman to see that her children, not just girls, even boys, are empowered so that the next generation, there is a difference that is made.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, another question is from Nisha. We can say that women don't register a complaint, fearing the humiliation and insult that they have to endure.
Yes.
So, what can be done to protect women who come forward to register a complaint?
See, if it is against the Domestic Violence Act, you have very good women protection officers and they are very sympathetic. I've dealt with many of them in Kerala. They are very, very supportive women, very feisty women who will go to great lengths to protect you. So you have that. You also have some NGOs, they call the service providers, that provision is there. And as I mentioned late there, we need to have more and more support groups coming up who can help women to empathize with them and cheer them on and support them. That is very important. Government also has certain schemes, but they need to be further fine-tuned to become really supportive. But the stigma you have to break. You have to ask yourself, what is more important? To give your child or your a life which is free from conflict and violence to develop in a proper way, or is it that you are going to suffer this beating and bashing forever on your life? The problem is, and this is an appeal to we have to make to parents. Don't marry your children just because of social requirements, or because even before they are able to stand on their own 2 feet. Give them the space to become mature and to make choices even in their marriage. Then many of these problems can be tackled.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, another question is from Vinny Alphonse. Can you explain about the international obligations towards gender justice?
I mentioned there are three international obligation is once you ratify a UN convention, then you are there is a review provision. See whether it is the convention for an elimination of all discrimination against women, as well as even in the children's thing, UNCRC, UN Convention for the Rights of the Child. In all of that, there is a review mechanism. So once you ratify a convention, then what happens is you are expected to progressively work towards achieving the benchmarks there. So as a result, and every time you have to file, there's a periodicity, you have to file what action you have taken towards achieving that. And that is reviewed. There's a review committee, an international review committee at the UN level, which will look at it and will offer their comments, saying that this is okay, but this is not good enough. They will make their comments. So, for example, a very interesting example I'll give you. The UNCRC, I'm more familiar with it, that's why I'm telling you that. The UN Convention for the Rights of the Child. It is the most signed convention in all the conventions in the United Nations. 191 countries have signed it, almost everybody. Guess which is the only country which is the notable exception? And you will be surprised to know that is the United States of America. Even countries like sub-Saharan countries have signed it, because children are your future. So you commit yourself to doing whatever it takes to improve, even within the constraints of your social setup. But the United States has refused to sign it. Why? Is it because they don't care for their children? No. It's a very interesting thing. They have a federal setup. So under their federal setup, every state has the right to, their consent is also required before the nation can ratify. Now, in many conservative states of America, they still believe that it is important to handcuff a child or in public, and put the child in a prison with the adults, which is against the convention of the contents of the convention of the UNCRC. So those states refuse to give the permission, and as a result, even today, the America is not ratifying it because this obligation they will not be able to fulfill. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So this is the kind of obligation. Now, sustainable development goals, it is being reviewed regularly. That is why nationally also the Niti Aayog, they are monitoring the implementation of the sustainable development goals by all the states in India. Why? Because they have to give a report. The country has to give a report on the progress it is being doing, and it is being reviewed in a systematic manner and comment. So we don't want to look bad in comparison to others. One place where we made a partial departure from the commitment, went back, is when we reduced the age of the child to, after Nirbhaya case, to 16 for doing a trial in court. Earlier, up to the age of 18, it was a juvenile justice board that was supposed to look at the child's any any conflict with law. It was not called a crime. It was called conflict with law. But now we have made a small compromise because again, it reflects the social and cultural ethos. There was such a hue and cry about that boy who was involved in the rape. We do not look at the social circumstances which led him into it. Anyway, that is beyond discussion. But the point is, after putting 18, which is the international standard, we stepped back in that particular case by saying at 16, if there is a heinous crime, it will be reviewed, and there is a mechanisms put there to check into that, and if the child fails to meet those standards, he will be tried in a court of law. So this is one case where we went back, just for an information.
Thank you, ma'am. This is the last question. It's from Winnie Alphonse again. She's asking, sometimes domestic violence act is misused to harass husband. What do
Yeah.
you think?
Every act is misused. Okay. But what I want to say is, how small is that number compared to or the number of women who are suffering? I mean, we talk so much about the same thing happens in child rights also. You will say that, oh, POXO Act is used to harass by women to harass their husbands, or by the husbands to harass, so diluted. The answer is not in dilution. The answer is in proper education and creating awareness, and to make women understand how hard fought these legal provisions are, how much of blood, sweat, and tears have gone to change the rigorous social and cultural setup to bring in these provisions, and how important it is not to misuse it. There again, all of us can play a part. That is what is important. Yes, there could be the rare case where the wife acts more aggressive than the husband. But how many of such cases do you see around you? So I think when you bring something to the table, we need to take a note of it, but not, it should be only a side dish. It's not the main dish. The main dish is protect the women, and also create awareness to everyone about the importance of not misusing these provisions and how precious these provisions are for the protecting the rights of women.
Ma'am, I know of several instances where single girl children face discrimination from their immediate family. How would you advise them? And as a child, being a child right activist, uh, what would be your advice to them?
What do you mean by a single girl child? I didn't understand that. Is it a small child or an adult, or in what way?
It's just being a single girl child. So the thing is, I myself, I am a single girl child,
Yes.
and it's not my parents, but I don't know. My parents don't have a problem, but my relatives really have a problem being a single girl child. So I have faced a lot of discrimination from the time I was small. So I just wanted to know, like, what would your advice be to children like that? Because
Tanya,
I really know of a lot of people like that.
Tanya, can I just have an understanding of what do you mean by that discrimination? If I get a clue, then I will be able to talk on that. Because, your parents by choice have a daughter, they are happy with it. Some others, in what way are they thinking that there is a problem here? Is it because your relatives think they should have had a son also? Or is it that they think you will be more
Exactly.
spoiled? Huh?
They feel that having no boy is in the family is a problem. It's an incomplete family. So I have been fighting all my life to prove that that's not right.
Okay. I think what you need to do is don't fight. Just think that Indira Gandhi was an only daughter and she made her father proud. So the important thing is you have to, don't worry about gender. Your parents made a clear choice. They were only having one child and they chose that to be you. So your job is to make them proud. You see, society, that is what I told you, these stereotypes, you can only fight them not by retaliating or feeling depressed. It is by living up to your total potential and showing that girls are as as what shall I say, as more capable of loving their parents and as capable of dealing with the world. I think that is the answer that you have to do. Don't worry if you're thing, but live up to your parents' aspirations. They thought you were enough. I think that is the message that you need to take away, not what your family.
Definitely, definitely, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank,
ma'am, for your insight and your thought-provoking session. I'm sure that the participants have been inspired by you, and we are indeed blessed to have you as a resource person with us today. I would now request Vidya ma'am, our teacher coordinator of the webinar, without whose efforts this webinar would not have been a success. And I invite her to deliver the vote of thanks.
A very graceful and warm evening to our Honorable Resource Person, Shobha Ma'am, Principal Dr. Raghunathan Sir, Vice Principal Sindhu Ma'am, Manager Ajimon Sir, teachers, students, and all gathered over here. It's my humble privilege to give a vote of thanks on this occasion. First of all, I'll start by thanking God for making this occasion a blessed one. On behalf of Sri Narayana Law College and the entire fraternity at college, I extend my sincere gratitude to our Honorable Resource Person, Shobha Ma'am, for accepting our invitation and being here with us for enlightening us with your insightful presentation.
thank you.
I extend my sincere welcome, ma'am. I extend my sincere gratitude to our principal, Dr. Raghunathan sir, for your continued guidance and motivation. I
Thank
also
you. Thank you.
extend, welcome, sir. I also extend my sincere gratitude to our vice principal, Sindhu ma'am, for your words of wisdom and encouragement. I sincerely thank our manager, Ajimon sir, for giving us an opportunity to organize this wonderful webinar. I sincerely convey my thanks to all the teachers and student coordinators, Tanya Tom and Siddharth Pisharadi, for backing us up and motivating us to carry out this webinar. Finally, yet importantly, I thank all the participants for showing immense interest and cooperation throughout this webinar. So with that note, I come to an end of vote of thanks. Thank you all once again.
Before we sign off, can I just also say a word of thanks to Vidya, Tanya, and of course, Dr. Rignath and is it Siddharth? I would like to thank them for making this process a very smooth one. For me, since I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not very familiar with webinars. I mean, this was one of the most comfortable the sessions that I have had. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, dear participants. With this, we come to the end of a very thought-provoking webinar. And the feedback form link has been put up in the chat box. Please fill it up. As soon as you fill it up, you would be receiving your e-certificate. Or if you haven't received them, kindly contact us in the numbers that was provided to you, both myself as well as Vidya ma'am's number. If there is any other inquiry that you need to make, you can always feel free to call us. Thanks a lot for making this webinar a grand success. Once again, thanking you, Shobha ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ragnar, Vidya, and all of you, all the participants. Thank you.
It's too much.